Josh, where's the campsite? It's coming up just ahead over there.
Are you scared of the dark?
Absolutely. Yeah. But I'm with my friends. I'm okay.
Are you?
Field of Geeks presents
The Super Unknown.
I'm Josh.
I'm Juan.
And I'm Dave.
And I'm Paul.
Hey, welcome, Paul. Special guest of the show this week. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and what fascinates you?
Sure, yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
I'm excited to be here. I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
Great.
And I have a background in nutrition, so I am a clinical research scientist with Kemin Human Nutrition and Health right now. And before that, I worked at Muscle Farm, which is a sports supplement company, and Kemin is an ingredient supplement company. So working in the field of supplements for human nutrition, human optimization. So ingredients that go into vitamins that you might find in the vitamin aisle, and then sports supplements as well. So my main interests are nutrition, sports nutrition, and human performance. So that's kind of what fascinates me, are how nutrition and exercise sort of interact and intersect and affect human optimization, human flourishing. I think the anti-aging is a really cool topic, and I'm not sure how many people are familiar with it. It's one of these topics that is really big among Silicon Valley people, and the wealthy and illustrious who want to live forever, right? And so there are scientists working on this kind of stuff, and there are a lot of scientists who believe that aging is essentially a disease that can be cured. And so I think that's a fascinating area, and is something that's at least worth talking about and kind of, playing around with, and separating the where we are from the, in reality, from the hype. I think people have either very low expectations of science or very high expectations of science. So
Sure.
It's either like, that's impossible and we'll never get there, or we're going to get there and we're going to get there tomorrow. So
Very fascinating to approach age that way, as something that can be cured.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Paul. Like, I studied something very similar, like where it was talking about how they view aging as a disease and things like that. I guess my question to you is, you're going more to the idea of like how nutrition affects that, because one of the other avenues I noticed that I learned about was having to have more of an integration with technology. I'm assuming you're going more on the nutritional side and how to manipulate the genes. Am I even close?
yeah, no, absolutely. So yeah, no, I'd love to go into the technology side as well. I don't know nearly as much about that. Are you thinking in terms of like a sort of like a digital upload, like, I want to live forever by, uploading into the cloud kind of a thing?
That's a concept that I've read into, yes. But
Mhm.
and then there's another one where I've looked into where it's basically like nanobots or something that they would
Okay.
inject you, and it's along the lines of like it'll see a problem, and then you can almost like, in a sense, like type, okay, fix the liver or make this function better.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, no, and I think I think that's interesting as well, and that I think ties much more into the nutrition. The biggest key here is that we have stem cells in our body, and so we have cells that can essentially, bring us back to a more youthful state. So I think the first step in thinking about this properly is to kind of, at least from a nutrition standpoint, is to think about this idea of a biological clock versus your sort of a chronological clock. So the idea that you might be chronologically, let's say, 50 years old, but that there are various ways you can measure your cellular health to indicate that maybe you actually have the cellular health of a 35-year-old.
Okay.
So I think for one, that's really cool, and I think that as that becomes cheaper to do, So there's a couple different ways that those clocks are generated. One is through what are called telomeres, which are essentially these little end caps on your chromosomes. And the longer they are, that is sort of one way to measure biological age. And that's relatively cheap. That's something that people can do, I think, for maybe $100, and to kind of get your biological age. So, like, if you want to, but it's not super accurate, but it's a pretty good proxy.
How do they test that?
I don't know the specifics. That's a little beyond my understanding of it. That's a good question. I'm not sure. I've looked into it a little bit, and I know it's not super expensive.
Blood, is it saliva? I mean, I don't know. I know you said you don't know how they test, but I'm like, do you have an idea if they take your blood, your saliva?
I'm guessing it's saliva because I think it's like you can just mail it in. So I think they would be able to do it. I think they could do it via saliva.
Okay, that makes sense.
And then, but there's a newer method called the Horvath clock that was recently discovered. And once again, I don't know exactly how they do that, but my understanding is that they use a few different parameters. So it's not just telomeres, but they measure along a couple of different things, and then they're able to very accurately determine your biological age. And part of the reason that accuracy becomes really important there is because, like, let's say that people wanted to, some of the ways that you could do anti-aging, obviously everybody wants it to be in a pill, but at the same time, there are like nutritional and dietary sort of avenues that you can take. Some of them aren't very pleasant, and so you kind of want to know that it's working if you go down that route. And so having a really accurate measurement could be nice, because you could say, okay, I spent a year on this diet I didn't like very much, but I was able to achieve minus 2 years on my biological clock, so now I'm 2 years younger after you know what I mean. So that kind of accuracy can be useful for sort of changing your behavior and doing interventions to kind of see, is this working or not.
I want to ask a question then. So let's get a little bit more sci-fi in this.
Okay.
Let's say I'm an individual who is missing a limb. Are they looking at technology or ways to regrow limbs? Or is that just too far off the grid of what we're talking about?
I think that that's going to be very possible, and I'm not sure, for me, I think that I wonder the race between like having a prosthetic that's very lifelike versus growing your own, like which one gets there faster.
Right.
And better, right? So like, if you were missing a limb, then if it's totally synthetic and you almost can't tell the difference, then how different is that for your usability than one that you regrew? And then the other thing, to really get sci-fi on it, like if it's prosthetic and it's super lifelike, right? You can easily switch it out with an upgrade, right? So like, how bionic do you now want to get? Do you want it to be as good as it was, or do you want it to be better? How nice is it to be able to switch out for an upgrade? I think at that point it becomes, I don't know, in my mind it almost becomes more desirable for it to be synthetic, because then you can kind of do all sorts of crazy stuff with it.
I got tons of questions, but has anyone here seen the movie Upgrade?
Yes.
It is the best, worst movie I've ever seen.
No, I haven't seen it.
It's like there's like there's sections in it where it's extremely good, and then it gets like, am I watching a B movie, and then it goes back to, it's weird. But the concept of it is, I believe the individual becomes paralyzed. Now, am I right, Josh?
I believe so, yeah.
And so there's a doctor, scientist, whatever, who puts a microchip on his spine, and now it's kind of like Venom. He has this like subconscious character inside of him that has command over his body. But
yeah, it's like the AI of the chip, isn't it?
Chip, yeah, the AI.
Yeah.
But the AI, I'm not gonna give away the whole story, but basically, is that form of technology something you think they're actually looking into and bringing it to the surface, like something that is assisting you? So like, basically, I know for a fact in recent time there's been people who've been getting microchips, So
Mhm.
would that be like the idea of saying, okay, I have a microchip. My microchip says I need to update something, just like I would download an update from my phone or something like that.
I was just listening to the second Elon Musk on Joe Rogan.
Yeah, I was
I
gonna
think he was
bring
on.
it up. Mhm.
I haven't heard the whole thing yet, but he's talking about, and talk about people who are like, making promises super soon. He's talking about Neuralink being available and embedded into people's heads. And Rogan's like, so how long are we thinking? And he's like, oh, 5 years.
What?
Like, in 5 years, we will have embedded Neuralinks in our brains. And it's Elon, right? It's like you
Yeah.
could say that that's crazy, but like the guy gets stuff done, right?
I totally applaud what his aspirations and everything he's accomplished. Does he come off to you as a Bond villain? A potential Bond villain? Like, I could just see him hitting like reset once we have all these devices and stuff.
I get going with that, Josh. I think this way. I think more like you gotta have like all of our great people in history that have helped us, like actual Tesla. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Even Einstein. All these people are kind of always a little off in general.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
They have to think outside the box,
of course.
and he actually thinks outside the box and has the capital to back it up.
True.
So
True.
it's an interesting deal about Elon because I like his concept on things. But yeah, as what you were saying, Paul, like the chip in the head, I knew something about that. And actually, I mentioned that on one of my podcast shows. Remember, Josh, the supercomputer, and they load that
Yeah,
chip up. Yeah, so I learned about that back in the 90s. So
that's
so
crazy.
Isn't it,
Yeah.
it's an interesting
Wow.
deal. If they were looking to that concept, they didn't say how exactly it was going to go, but their theory was like there'll be a day where they can put a microchip. The way they said it was like a liquid form, and you would rub it in your skull, and it would dissolve in front of your skull, and it would sit in front of your brain and record all the activity from your consciousness, your subconsciousness, everything. Then when you pass away, they would take the chip out and put it in this massive supercomputer, and the goal was 100,000 years from now, their children would have the technology to just upload us into a supercomputer, and it'd be like we never died. It would just be like virtual reality.
That's crazy. That's
So-
crazy. Could you?
You're talking like, have you guys seen Altered Carbon?
I haven't yet.
Of course, I have. I've watched it.
That's
But
super
that's the
good.
idea.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's so good.
so
But they
good.
call it a stack, and that the stack, and that
Yeah.
goes in the spine, so back of the neck.
Yeah, so then you can. It's basically
Yeah.
just like a hard drive, like a flash drive. You can just have on your person, so that it records everything, and then it just gets swapped out with different bodies.
Well, then they get you with that unlimited
Yep.
storage cloud fee, for your mind, and
Yeah, that's
just
only
how
if you're with Apple. You're like, oh, you're out of space. You're gonna have to delete some
Wouldn't
memory.
that suck? It's like, well, I guess I don't need to
hate on
eat.
Apple.
I guess that's gonna be the war, maybe, Paul, is between the technology option. I guess they're both technology based. I mean, because you have to develop the medicine or the drugs or however you want to phrase it to organically enhance yourself versus just going all into the whole sci-fi realm. I mean, I don't know. I imagine technology side would be a lot more expensive. Would you say that, Paul?
Well, I think where it gets kind of tricky for me is that with the technology side, I think that we have a lot of faith in our concept of transferring bodies, right?
Mhm,
Like that's
yeah.
never been done. We don't know that that's actually. I don't know that's going to be me, right?
Right.
So I've heard even some people complain, or not complain, but talk about how even like teleportation with Star Trek, like that's not the same person. Right? Once you
Right.
teleport and dissolve yourself and you're somewhere else, why is that the same person?
Right.
You're putting a lot of faith in dissolving your body,
Right.
if you will, right?
Right.
So I think the technology one is tricky because I feel like there's a gap there that we're not addressing and just hoping on faith that if I can gather enough information that makes me me, and I put it into something else, that's going to be me. But we don't know, right? Because we don't. It's a sort of mind-body problem, or the heart problem of consciousness, right?
Right.
We don't know if the consciousness comes along exactly.
It's the old ship of thesis problem.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Right. So we think that we think that the whole is the same as the sum of its parts. But like, who's the first person who's going to try it, right? So I think in some ways the technology can get to the edge of that chasm maybe faster in some ways, because the biological problem is tricky in a different sort of way, because you have to kind of affect every cell, right? So like, all of your cells have to essentially, like, you can't go too young, because essentially you become cancerous. Like, our bodies are this delicate balance between like cell death and then cell overgrowth, right? And so on either side, if you have too much, it becomes a disease state. So cancer in some ways is just a disease of overgrowth. And so, cancer is kind of the limiting factor on the upward end of age. So it's like we're tweaking these dials, but if you tweak them a little bit too much, you're back in a disease state. It's just a different disease state. So
right.
So you're saying just right formula, almost like that right combination of the correct age to reduce to the correct, I guess. It's almost like a crapshoot.
And it continually changes, right? So like the biology, like it's like you have a system, as you get older, all of your systems kind of worsen at the same time. And so you're constantly tweaking the system, but it's not like the system stays the same. It is slowly getting worse at the fidelity. So you're trying to keep its fidelity optimal, and you're trying to keep it at this, meanwhile, all of the systems are kind of crashing slowly. So, it's kind of where stem cells are exciting, where it's like, oh, but there's a way to kind of regenerate and bring cells back to a perfectly young state. And that's true, but, it's not that easy. It's not that easy to hack.
Mm-hmm.
I get what you're saying. So I guess, Paul, like right now, as for advancements in this kind of study, what is showing positive effects right now, like from the realm of nutrition, I guess?
Okay, so here's
what have they found success in?
Yeah, here's the good and the bad of it. So I think the first thing that I want to say for everybody to understand is that increased lifespan goes hand in hand with increased health span, right? So I think one of the fears that people have is it's like, well, I don't want to grow older for longer. Like, I don't want to be decrepit for more years. Like, who wants that, right?
Right.
But the people who live long tend to live really healthy to the end, right? So when you go to these so-called blue zones in the world, which are these areas where you have a high number of centenarians, so like Okinawa, for example, when you go to Okinawa and you talk to the 100-year-old people, like, they're functional, they are living, they're not running marathons, but they're fine. Like, they're able to, like, get out of bed, to live their life, to climb the hills, to continue with a high quality of life. So I think that's really important. That health span is primary for anybody in this field. We want to live healthy longer. So that's important. So that's, I think, sort of good news. Part of the bad news is that all of the research in this area started with certain animal models where they were looking at caloric restriction. So restricting overall the amount of calories that you're consuming. So that is the best sort of model, or that's the best. All of the research sort of starts there. So even the supplements that people are looking into. Mm-hmm. So basically fasting, but most of the original studies were a form of caloric restriction. So essentially 25% less calorie intake overall. So Fasting can be somewhat different, where fasting can sometimes be more of like a time period of lessened intake, but there's a lot of overlap. So for lack of a better
Right.
word, sure, fasting or caloric restriction in that world, right? Which nobody likes, right? I mean, this isn't fun. Nobody's happy to say like, it's like if you imagine like, essentially if you imagine caloric restriction, like I would like you to eat 3/4 of every meal that you ever consume. It's like, oh, so you want me to be hungry all the time? That sounds fun. Can't wait. Like, sign me up. That's the best, right? And fasting, is tricky, right? I mean, it's not, there's a reason most people don't do it anymore. It's not that fun. And so that's where people are more excited about, okay, well, are there fasting mimetics? Are there are there pills I can take that'll do it for me without without having to go through that? But from a diet and nutrition standpoint, most of the research at least centers around kind of some sort of fasting caloric restriction or some sort of fasting mimetics. So ketogenic diets or other diets that maybe trick your body into thinking you're fasting.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. Do ketones play a part in any of this?
Yeah. Ketones can play a big part. And it's hard to know what is playing a part in many ways, but ketones absolutely are involved in every single, they're involved in, they're probably mildly involved in caloric restriction. They're definitely involved in fasting. They're definitely involved in ketogenic diets. And so they can play a role along several fronts.
Okay.
And I think part of the way to think about it too, in terms of fasting, like, okay, well, I don't, for anybody out there who's just like, okay, I hear what you're saying, but I don't get why that makes any sense, right? Is that it's kind of like, one way to think about fasting is that it's kind of like being able to, I often think about the body in some ways as sort of like a bus station, right? Or like the Port Authority of New York, right? And if you constantly have food going through there, buses going through there, like the place is just going to get dirtier and dirtier and dirtier and dirtier. After a while, you sometimes want to have periods where there's no buses running through and you could just clean up. And that's basically what the body's going to do when you go through a sort of period of fasting, right? So, and sometimes, and for people also who are like balking at the idea of fasting, like we all fast every day, right? And it's just while we sleep,
Right.
We're fasting. So one of the benefits of sleep is that during that time period, you're not consuming anything and your body can go to work to help, clean up. And, one of the methods that he uses to clean up is what's called autophagy, which is essentially, recycling cellular material that it no longer needs in that form, right? So if you have like defective, organelles in your cells, you can kind of recycle those. So it's very much like a cleanup process. And so some of the research is around what's called time-restricted feeding, which is essentially kind of opening up the window of that nighttime fast. So, if you're sleeping for 8 hours, what happens if very often people will start eating as soon as they wake up and then eat until they go to bed, right? And why not, right? It's delicious. Food's delicious. So
I know.
But if you expand that window a little bit, you can start seeing health benefits just by expanding that sort of 8-hour sleep window to a 9-hour or to a 10-hour or to 11 hours. So it doesn't necessarily have to be 16 hours of fasting. It doesn't necessarily have to be a full day of fasting in order to see benefits.
Is that the main key, you think, to these other regions that are able to be in their hundreds, let's say, and still active? You think fasting, obviously diet's got to have something to do with it, but do you find these people are fasting a lot to maintain?
So, excellent question. So one of the blue zones, at least that I know of, which kind of spurred on the entire sort of like major olive oil kick that kind of happened, and the Mediterranean diet kick that kind of happened maybe like, let's say 10 years ago. A lot of that research came from the island of Crete out of Greece. And they noticed that was one blue zone where there were a lot of people that were a lot of centenarians, a lot of people living to be long. And they wanted to pick something, as we do in their sort of like reductionist sort of scientific approach, people wanted to say, what's the one thing that we can pull out of Crete that we can then, turn around and sell, essentially? And that was olive oil. Well, they eat tons of olive oil, 2 to 3 times what a typical person does.
Wow.
So that was a lot of the kick. You're like, you got to replace everything with olive oil. You got to do all these things. But there were 3 other major factors that I still don't think are the only factors, but are all factors I think are really important. One was fasting. So these folks are Eastern Greek Orthodox, right? So in the Greek Orthodox Church, they are doing some form of fasting half the year. So every other day on average, they're doing some sort of fasting. Sometimes it's a meat fast, sometimes it's an olive oil fast, sometimes it's a full fast, but they're doing some sort of fasting every other day. So I think that has an important effect. Number 2, it's very hilly there. So they're always walking hills. And I think that has a huge effect. Where, you're doing walking, so it's kind of low impact, but it's kind of it's good cardiovascular while being low impact on your joints. And they probably get used to it, right? It's like, go walk a hill. It's not easy. Like, it's hard, right?
Yeah.
It's hard on the cardiovascular, but it's not that high impact. So I think that that's a really good form of exercise for individuals, especially if they're doing it like an hour or 2 or 3 a day, and it's just part of their life, right? Sure. They don't have to take extra time out or whatever. The last one that I think is fascinating is just that the average person from Crete was able to recognize 300 different wild greens, right? So while they're walking those hills, they can just look at the pasture and be like, oh, there's purslane, and there's lamb's quarters, and there's wild spinach, and there's a wild... And so for me, like, if you're of a culture where you know that many greens, then chances are you're eating quite a bit of those, right? And you compare that to the Western culture where, like, we don't eat any wild greens. You know what I mean? I don't see too many people in their backyard being like, oh, while I'm weeding, I'm going to just pop these in my mouth,
Right.
So even though you can with most weed, right? So that's just one example of where some of these people are using fasting quite a bit. And in Western culture, fasting was a big part of the Catholic Church and the Catholic calendar. Muslims have Ramadan. And so it is another sort of one of those ways that sort of religious rituals have helped to encourage kind of healthy habits, right?
Right.
It's crazy that you say this stuff, Paul, because I've been fasting for like the last week, intermittent fasting.
Okay, awesome.
And in the past, just because of my parents and how I was raised, my mother being a Christian, my dad being basically like a chocolate Jew is the way I call it. It's the only way I can explain it in its quickest form. Okay? So, Sammy Davis Jr., Whoopi Goldberg, that type deal. Anyway,
Awesome. I love it.
That being said, like, both of my parents practiced in their own way different forms of fasting. Like, my mom her church would have you fast for a day. My dad, his practice would have him fast for like 2-3 days. So I had been doing it since I was a kid, off and on. And so, like, I did a lot of studying on it from a spiritual aspect, a mental aspect, and a physical aspect. And so it's like, it's almost like you're giving me this unique confirmation of like stuff that I've learned over the years towards fasting. I'm not even saying on a spiritual level, I'm just saying on the physical benefits of it. Because I've noticed that, like, people that fast a lot, they do look very young. I'm still, to this day, my parents look like they would be my siblings.
Whoa.
And my mom's turning 60 next week, and my dad's pushing 70.
Wow.
So, and
that's amazing.
And
congrats to them.
Yeah, my dad, since I was a kid, he rarely ever ate, and he was a cross-country runner. He ran a lot of cross-country. Like, he never was a big guy. He would eat, when he would eat, he would, like, feast. He would eat a ton of food, and then he'd be like, oh, I won't eat again until tomorrow. Or some days he won't eat at all.
That's crazy. Wow.
And he's always been He's just always been that way. It's just who he is. So when he eats like a madman, but then he won't touch anything for like the next 20 hours.
That's crazy. Did he ever say he had hunger pains? That's what gets me. Like it's weird. Like sometimes I'm not hungry. I don't know if this makes sense. I'm not hungry, but my stomach is like, feed me, and I'm like, I don't want to eat, but this damn stomach pain is irritating me. It's like, fine, I'll feed you.
I'll get it. This example, Josh. The way I look at it is more like it's like a sport for me. Like that first day you do fasting, it's going to suck.
Yeah.
And then the next time you do it, it'll be like, okay, now I did 8 hours this time today. Now I'm going to go for 12 hours. And then, oh, I did a whole day.
Right.
And then leave it alone for a bit. And now I did 2 days. It's like, but since I have been doing it at such a young age, that I started earlier. So like the longest I've ever gone is on a water fast for 7 days.
Wow. Nice.
Wow. How'd that
That's
feel?
awesome.
Well, after the third day, you don't think about food.
Wow.
And now, Juan, are you taking ketones, or are you taking like some sort of salt or some sort of something to keep your sodium, potassium?
Well, that was a time ago. That was probably maybe like 5 years ago that I did that.
Okay.
Currently, I do what is called OMAD, or it could also be called the Warrior's Diet. So I do, OMAD means 1 meal a day. So within that time frame, because I'm a person that's challenging for me to cut weight. Easy for me to gain weight. Whereas I have friends who, they think about losing weight and they'll drop like in an instant. I don't have that ability. So what I do, I try to get as many calories as I can from every different macro I need. So some protein, some good carbohydrates, and some fats. And I try to get as much as I can in. And I know I can't go over my caloric intake in that one sitting. I just can't. I'm not getting up. And mine is roughly about 2,000 calories. But what I'll do is, if I do get hunger pains, Josh, I'll cheat and go and get something liquid. I just won't chew anything else.
Oh, okay.
So like, that's just like my default, like when I'm really getting that. So like little tricks might be like chicken broth, or just something that it satisfies the taste buds, but the caloric intake's not high enough. Or like
to kick you out. Yeah. And I like ketones for it as well. So I do use ketones when I'm fasting, since they are essentially, and it's going to be liquid, and it's going to be salty, and it's going to be something where, you're getting the salt that you need while your body is kind of, trying to readjust with what you're doing to it. So, it is important to be getting salts during fasting, and the ketones are kind of, you're giving your body the fuel that you're trying to make it make anyway. So it's kind of like priming the pump. So I find that they can really help to get through a lot of it. But yeah, Juan, everything you're saying, man, I'm 100% on. So I think that I completely agree with everything you said. I do feel like there are a lot of sort of spiritual and mental benefits that are really important as well, right? Because and I agree with what you're saying in terms of, to Josh, where part of it's training, right? It's like, it's like going into the gym. Like, you don't start whole hog when you go into the gym. You start slow, you get your body used to it. And, so many people, and Juan, tell me if you've had this experience too. Like, when you tell them you're doing this, how many people tell you like, oh, I can't do that? Like,
all the time.
Get-go, the first thing they say, oh, I can't do that. And it's like, I'm not special. I just did it. Like, you can do it. I'm not saying you want to do it, and I'm not saying it's not going to be rough. But I'll tell you one story. When I was doing it, and I was once when I was doing, I think it was a full day fast, and I feel like it was the next day, and it was like, I don't remember if it was the morning of, or if it was the next morning. But I just remember being at work, and I was like locked into this like daydream about like, about like pizza. Like it was just appearing in my mind like so vividly.
Oh, welcome to my world.
It wasn't that I wanted it. It wasn't that I was hungry for it. It was just like the image just popped into my brain so vivid. I could see it, and it was just like pizza. It was just like my brain. It was like an advertisement. It was like my brain was just like pizza. Like I forgot. Like
He was challenging you. That's awesome.
I exist.
Paul, you
And
might
it's
have
just
a
like-
chip.
I know, right?
Oh, what if
Well,
that could be something dangerous too, couldn't it? If marketing gets into your chip somehow, they're like, we need to sell this product right now. We're gonna give it to him in his
McDonald's
dreams.
going crazy in your brain. McNuggets.
Yeah, Shamrock Shakes.
I mean, did they even? I don't even know if they have to.
I do
You
want to
know?
add
That's
this.
true. That's true. Yeah, the
I
old
think it's there.
movie theater
I think it's
tactic.
out there.
Yeah, remember? You probably heard this, everyone, when you're like, I think drive-ins made it popular. You'd be sitting there in your car or whatever, or sitting, I guess, and all of a sudden they have these concessions come out and dance on the screen, you know, and it was like subliminal. It's like, oh, I want some popcorn. I want some candy. I want a soda. Yeah, so it already got you there, but yeah, the chip could even be worse, I guess. You got to pay someone to shut it off or something, or set it like. Maybe that's the future. Like, you know what? Instead of actually using my trying to use my mind, maybe I need to get some assistance and just have the chip tell the brain, like, okay, we're gonna just stick to this keto. We're gonna fast. Okay, we're gonna tell that.
Has an appetite suppressant setting probably.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, it's like we're gonna tell the stomach to shut up, and we're just gonna run the show. And
I do want to add this in there as another technique, and maybe Paul, you may have said this before or something like that to somebody, but what I tell a lot of clients is the signal for hunger and thirst are pretty close to each other. So a lot of times people may think they're hungry and they're actually dehydrated. So your body just doesn't know how to the signal is so similar.
yes,
You might actually be hungry, but you're really dying of thirst. Your body needs hydration.
gotcha.
And needs to consume more water. So that's a common thing that happens a lot of times with people. They're not really hungry.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and they just
Very
jump
true.
to conclusions like, oh, I gotta feed, I gotta eat. Yeah, screw this diet I just started this morning. Now I gotta eat some chocolate or something. I don't know. Whatever your brain tells you, right? Which is always
Yeah,
the wrong
one-
thing to me.
Yeah, one of my favorites is my kids when they're like, "Oh, I'm thirsty for soda," and I'm like, "You can't be thirsty for something. You're either thirsty or you're not." You could say, "I'm thirsty and I would like to quench that thirst with soda,"
Right.
but
That's
like,
better.
there's no different, dial for "I'm thirsty for milk" or "for water." No, you're not.
Yeah, and
So-
I've told my kids after a meal, they're like, I'm still hungry. I'm like, have some water. That's not going to do anything. Yeah, but that candy you want's not going to either. Like, have some water. It's so silly. It's like, well, this little sugar stick will fill me up. No, it won't.
Right.
It'll dissolve before it even gets to your stomach. It's just, yeah, just nuts. But kind of going back to, like you were talking about the biology testing. Is that how you said it?
Yeah,
watched
so
that.
sort of like the Horvath clock or like the telomere clock. So it's basically your biological clock. I know usually we talk about that in terms of, having children and stuff like that. But essentially just that your cellular age could be different from your chronological age. Like I've been on this earth for 45 years, but maybe my cells are operating, depending on your activities, your cells could be operating as if they're 60 years old or as if they're
Right.
30 years old.
Kind of like organs, right? Like, you could be 26, but you have a heart of a 80-year-old man, let's say, if you treat it really bad or you
Sure.
have a deformity, whatnot. What if they can harness, like, okay, this is your age. Like right now, they're doing these tests, correct?
Yes.
So if they give you the results and it's not great, what are they wanting you to take supplements or change your diet? Is fasting a part of it? And if this could be mastered, let's say, by everybody, what is the life expectancy, like the rate of increase, do you think, or even imagine it could be?
Right. So I think that the benefit of now having these clocks, and especially the accuracy of the Horvath clock, I'm excited that we can start to look at scientific interventions and kind of see like, okay, well, let's compare and contrast now and see how effective any of these things are, right?
Hmm.
Because the biggest problem with anti-aging without a biological clock is it's like I could tell you that a supplement will make you live longer, but we're going to have to wait till you die to find out if it actually did anything. And
Right.
even then, we don't know, right? Maybe you would have lived that long anyway, right?
Right, right.
So having this clock now can really help with scientific interventions. In my opinion, I mean, I think that our body is so affected by so many things. So, the big four for me are nutrition, exercise, sleep, and then stress reduction. So stress reduction can take a lot of forms. I like meditation, but that can take a lot of forms. But all four of those factors are going to affect your overall health. And I think in terms of diets, the way that I think about it is that you have a sort of a fasting system in your body of metabolism. What do we do when there is no food? And then you have a fed and digestion sort of system. What do we do when there's a lot of food? And so one of those is dominated by mTOR, which is really important for people who want to grow muscle and who want to, who want to grow muscle, grow bone, those types of things, all of which are really important as you're aging, right? So you don't want to turn that off completely. You want to still have good bones, good muscles. Those become really important as you age. At the same time, those systems can then lead to sort of cancer and overgrowth, and so you want to keep that system in balance. On the other side, you have starvation, which is dominated by what's called AMP kinase or AMPK or AMPK, and that system you can kind of play with in order to increase autophagy, to increase some of these systems that will help to kind of keep everything cleaned up and activate stem cells and keep cancer down, right? But obviously we don't want to turn on starvation all the time because you die that way too. So
Right.
so that's where it's something like intermittent fasting or certain sort of a balance between turning these things off and on can be really beneficial. In terms of supplements, there are supplements that start to play with these systems. I think the area of ketones is really interesting. I don't see a lot of research in terms of ketones and anti-aging yet. It seems more focused on sort of performance, human performance, and sort of sports performance, and more things on that side. But I think that there is a role to play. I think we're still not sure about, ketones are a little bit tricky because usually your ketones are, up until recently, ketones in your body are low when food is plentiful, and ketones are high when food is not plentiful. So they play a role in a specific context. So taking ketones when food is plentiful, I think kind of confuses the body a little bit, and I'm not sure how exactly that's going to work. So it's been a little bit tricky in terms of ketone supplementation. But I think there's definitely a role there, but we're not quite there yet. The one area that I would like to sort of have everybody leave with in terms of supplementation is the area of sort of resveratrol and pterostilbene. I think that those are both supplements. So resveratrol comes from red wine and has gained some notoriety in the past few years. There's been a lot of research on that, and pterostilbene comes from blueberries. It's a very similar biochemical. I do take pterostilbene on a regular basis. I think that they're similar, so you can take one or the other. And I think that there's some good indications that those biomolecules are effective. And then additionally, nicotinamide riboside or NR, I really like as well. So NAD, NR sort of turns on, increases NAD plus in your body, and NAD plus is a biomolecule that the body uses to determine whether you have a lot of glucose, essentially, carbohydrate, a lot of food or not. So are you fed or are you fasted? NAD plus is a major biomolecule. So keeping the NAD plus high, and as you get older, your NAD plus reduces. So keeping NAD plus high is really, really important. So you can kind of do it through vitamin B3 and through niacin, but having something like NR, and the brand name is Niagen, I think is a better way to do that. So
wow,
I think that was a lot, so I apologize. I can kind of,
Only thing I wanted to add, the last thing I was going to say is, and I think we kind of didn't bring it up, but I do believe from what I've experienced through fasting and what I've educated myself on, there are a massive increase in human growth hormone from fasting of your natural secretion. Am I on the right track there, Paul?
Yes, that's my understanding too. I do believe it's transient, which I think is actually good. Because I did want to ask you, Juan, I'm curious how you find that it affects your performance, right? Because it's so interesting to me that like a lot of the people that are really interested in fasting and these types of fasting mimicking diets are like bodybuilders and people who typically want growth at all costs. And so, but in my experience and with some of the athletes and bodybuilders that I've worked with, they don't find that it decreases their performance in terms of muscle mass or in terms of strength. So what have your experiences been with that?
I think it's a trick question. I think with a bodybuilder, for example, unless we're talking about a person who considers him or herself to be a natural bodybuilder, I think there's a lot of other PEDs that are having influence over the body and the hormonal, secretion and things like that, which is going to make it hard for that individual to evaluate their performance because they don't know what to place that performance on. So the best example I've seen and experienced is actually the Bradley Cooper movie, Limitless. One of the things about, if you have seen the movie, basically if you have not seen the movie, basically he's given the super pill and it gives him like unlimited access to his brain in the grand scheme of things. And one of the things they kept saying in the movie is he had to keep reminding himself to eat.
Whoa.
He was in a fasted state, like
right.
95 time. So he had to be reminded to eat. He was losing weight. So like people that are like really thin, that's why I wouldn't use the bodybuilder as much. Like I feel sharp when I'm fasting. Like once you break past that barrier of the hunger pains, I feel sharp.
Yes.
I feel like focused. I can write 3 novels. I can run for hours. My endurance level goes up. My blood pressure goes down. Yet I have a constant like good rhythm in my heart rate. Things like that I've evaluated and looked at. So it's like all these good things, and it's just like a clear mind. How you feel, just every sensation is better. So like even when you eat food, it'll actually taste better. So like you'll actually gravitate to like fruit more than you would gravitate towards like fast food, just because the fast food, it almost seems like, just like I was saying with the bodybuilder, it feels like that synthetic stuff, it'll mess with your senses.
Right. Like it's almost like pixelated. Like you can taste the pixels. Like, wait a minute, this is manufactured. This is fakery. Yeah. No, I would agree with all that, Juan. Absolutely. And these are really good points because, I don't think that's something that people necessarily understand or would naturally assume comes from fasting. But I 100% agree with all of those. I mean, in terms of mood and in terms of mental benefits, like they are profound, right? They are profound and they're very, very noticeable, right? And it kind of makes sense, right? So I try to look at all biology through an evolutionary lens. And if you think about it, like if you're starving back in Neolithic, Paleolithic times, that's because you've been hunting for a while, especially Paleolithic and the hunter-gatherer, right, where it's like you've been hunting for a while and you haven't succeeded. That's why you're starving. So your body kind of gives you like a last jolt in order to like, okay, buddy, like this is it. Like if we don't do it now, then we're done for. So like let's sharpen the senses, let's elevate the mood, let's sharpen the energy, let's sharpen the focus, let's put everything, this is it, this is the time. So it kind of makes sense, right, that the body does that. And I think that's also where the human growth hormone comes in, where that seems counterintuitive. Like, why would the body initiate more growth in a time of starvation? It seems somewhat counterintuitive. I'm not sure the exact mechanism and why, other than to say that it's probably some sort of like a protein sparing mechanism where the body is trying to spare burning muscle and is using human growth hormone to kind of combat, almost as a hedge, to kind of combat some of the other starvation hormones that are flowing through your body.
I think it has something to do with basically just because, and I only talk about like America or North America, like how we eat, we've become very like glucose are basically carb dependent. Mm-hmm. So basically when you fast, you allow your body to reprogram itself and become more fat dependent. So our sources of energy right now, predominantly most people, their source of energy is carbohydrates or glucose, instead of using or throwing fat into the furnace. So it's a weird thing our bodies do. Right now it wants to use sugar first, muscle second, fat third. And so when you put yourself in a fast state, it actually reprograms it and forces it to go after the fat.
Right.
Based on stuff that I've looked into.
Yeah, no, and I think there's some truth to that for sure. I would, this is something I've thought about for a while, and I would, I would take the blame a little bit off of Western diets. I think that this is programming that happened, back in, plants and in bacteria days, right? So,
right.
Because our whole system is something that bothered me for a while, where I was like, why are all of our systems based on glucose? Like, why is glucose the driver for everything? And, I think it goes back to photosynthesis. It goes back to the fact that, at some time in our ancient evolutionary history, the best thing to make out of, water and carbon dioxide with sunlight as an activator was glucose. So then the rest of us are just screwed to then make everything, all systems of metabolism, then work off of glucose as the primary, right? So,
right.
So we're kind of stuck with that, right? And then we go through this Paleolithic era where we're largely eating fat and protein, and those are our main sources. And then we get to the Neolithic with agriculture, and then carbs go through the roof, because it's like, oh, we can just grow tons of carbs.
Yeah, starchy.
Right, and then we're eating just tons and tons and tons of carbs, and then up until today, where then we invent cake, and then we're all done for it.
Dang it!
So good.
Milkshakes.
So,
hey guys, I'm sorry I haven't really been present here. I've been sitting here listening while eating a family bucket of fried chicken, and I can't all fast.
Got it, boy, Dave.
So you've reached Dave. That's what he's saying. You've reached him. He's changing.
Yeah,
all this fasting has made me hungry.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, you've touched a nerve, because I'm not going to eat the second bucket I have here. No, I appreciate you coming on. Unfortunately, I have to drop off, but you guys still keep talking and still recording. So, but no, interesting stuff. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's been an eye opener, that's for sure. Yeah, I am motivated.
I love it, man. That's awesome.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Dave.
All right, Dave.
Talk at you later.
Dave.
Right, gotta go wash my hands
from the grease.
Greasy.
I might just use the bucket. Wipe the face on the bucket.
Just fill it with soap and use it.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Later, Dave.
One thing I wanted to get into a little bit more, going back to sci-fi, the whole Highlander aspect you were talking about, Paul, like You know,
Yeah.
like if you could harness perfection, let's say, with regards to your age, like tackling that, like, is there any realistic projections you find of lifespan increase from this? I mean, I guess you'd have to almost start from the ground up, right? Like when you're born, or is it kind of too late, but you can still, of course, get benefits from it, but not like lifelong benefits?
No, it's a great question. Yeah, I know, and thanks for bringing us back to that.
Yeah.
Are there realistic projections? In my mind, no, there aren't. People
Yeah.
are crazy. Like, I've heard sort of quote-unquote futurists just throw out like 500. Like, oh yeah, 500 within our realm, we're going to hit it. And I'm like, 500? Are you serious? Like, how can you think that? Like, what are you talking about? Like, we're lucky to break 100. Like,
Right.
for me, no. For me, so to just, I mean... I think it's going to be fascinating, and I think we should definitely just play around with the idea of 500 because it's fun, and why not? And who
Right.
knows, right? Because with the combination of technology and biology, I don't think there are limits. I mean, if we can take consciousness and put it in a different body or a different interface, I think that's fascinating. And I don't know about you guys, but man, when I watched Highlander, I was like, sign me up. Like, immortality, let's do it. I'm ready.
Dude,
I'm ready for
quickening,
immortality.
The quickening.
Let's make it happen, right? But just to touch on sort of realistically, no, I don't think we're too late. I think that that's the beauty of sort of stem cells, is that there is research that seems to indicate that there are drugs in development that can reverse aging. So it's not just maintenance. It's not just stopping aging, but there is some evidence of reversal.
Right.
So I do think that I think that if you're in a sort of like sweet zone of sort of like 20 to let's say 65 or 70, especially if you've kept yourself pretty healthy, I think that there's a lot of room for messing around. I'm kind of realistically would love like a 125, 150. I mean, I think that would be pretty cool. I think that's sort of realistic.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
but if people are living to be 500, I mean, like my biggest, people better start getting some hobbies, because
Right.
You're gonna have a lot of time on your hands, and like let's do some interesting. As a kid, that's what was cool to me, right? I was like, okay, like the first 100 years, I'm gonna master kung fu, and then the second 100 years, I'm gonna master, because you're watching the Highlander anyway, so you're like, how many martial arts am I gonna master? Like, I'm
Right.
gonna master like ancient Sumerian elbow killing, and then
Right.
I'm gonna I don't know. It's just like, it's like kid imagination stuff, but like people better get some hobbies, because we're gonna have a lot of time on our hands.
Well, especially if the retirement age doesn't change, it's like, well, you've hit 70, or and I guess I don't know, watch some Netflix and enjoy your life.
Well, I get another idea, and it's a theory. It's two ideas actually. The first one is almost like the Matrix. Like, you're basically plugged into this machine, and your actual physical body is not being used, but your consciousness in a realm where if you actually hurt yourself, you're not really hurting your physical body, but like whatever the brain believes could, I guess, tech happen. But basically, like something like that, I could see more realistic, like a virtual reality type scenario, so they can preserve the body for hundreds of years, hypothetically, and be like,
and safer
okay.
too, right? Because if we do things biologically, accidental death is always on the table, right? So it's just like, you get your certificate that it's like, we guarantee you're going to live to be 500, and then you're walking down the street at 180, and some, I don't know, truck comes barreling through, and it's like, dude, I had another 300. Like,
Right.
like you just ruined a really sweet setup for me.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, accidental death you got to take off the table somehow, right? And then your simulation situation, I feel like, does a pretty good job with that.
Scenario I could see happening. And the other idea was, and maybe you might know more about this, Paul, is like because they've done it like more along the lines of cloning, like cloning organs, cloning whatever, limbs, things like that, where it's like, okay, the body breaks down, we know this, so actually cloning your DNA print, and that's where we get back into the transferring of consciousness and all that. But something like that, do you know that being applied to this kind of idea?
I mean, I definitely think that, you know, I feel like there's a lot of exciting technologies that play into it. So I think from a sci-fi standpoint, there's like a lot of people thinking about it. Like, you know, I feel like since I found out at least about 3D printing, I feel like that's always been part of the conversation. Like, you'll be able to print your organs, you'll be able to print, you know, as soon as something, you know, malfunctions, we'll be able to print it, and it'll be perfect fidelity. You know, I don't know, man. Look, here's the funny thing, right, about the body that maybe people don't necessarily think about, but especially in the present age of COVID that we're in, is really important to think about. Your body is under a constant attack. It's under a constant battle, right? Of like, your body is on the battlefield of bacteria and viruses. That's essentially like the Battle of Gettysburg, and all the uniforms look the same. And it's like, friend or foe, friend or foe. I don't know. Are you a friend? Are you a foe? I don't know. Let's tag you. Let's, you know, somebody else's job. You know, the body doesn't do a great job in accepting foreign material, because that's what keeps you alive. Your body needs to have a really good bouncer. Your body needs to say no to a lot of cells, right? So just because something is 3D printed with your, you know, genetic material, is your body fooled? I don't know. You know, we don't know enough about the systems that your body uses to know, until we try it, if the body's going to be like, I'm fooled, or nope, sorry, I know this is fake, get it out.
You said the body can reject it, basically, like potentially. Okay, I get that.
So, you know, I think we'll get better at it. I mean, that's sort of the fun and the art of science, is that I think we'll try it, it maybe won't work, we'll try it some more, we'll tweak it, we'll figure out, you know, it's like we'll figure out how to sneak in when the bouncer's back is turned. Like, that's you know, that's the job, to kind of, you know, keep working at it. So I think we can get there, right? But I think when we speculate about it, we underestimate how good the body is at, you know, detecting foreign material.
Right. Exactly.
Interesting.
Exactly.
So,
man.
so we'll see. You know, I think it's going to happen. Right?
Yeah.
But you know, because obviously, look, we do transplants, right? We do, you know, we have situations where a kidney from one person can go into another, where, you know, we've done a pretty good job so far of tricking the body with totally foreign material that's totally genetically foreign. So if you have something that's genetically identical, well, that should do a good job, right? But out the gate, will it work? I don't know. So I think it'll take a little time for us to tweak it, and, you know, but I think we can get there where it works really, really well. And I think, too, the benefit I'm hoping is that it'll be more of a sort of cloning type approach will work better across the board. Does that make sense? Where right now we're dealing with this thing where some people are better matches, which basically means that some people are better hosts and some people are better, you know, givers, if you will, right? But like, but the individual to individual variation is so high in terms of, you know, it's not just the kidney going in, it's the system it's going into. So I feel like by using identical genetic material, we'll have a better overall, like, once we tweak it, it'll work better for all systems, as opposed to this kind of individual by individual customized basis that we're kind of working with now, right?
Right.
Wow. Yeah. Oh my gosh. We got to have you back on, Paul, and really get more into this.
Don't bring it back, Paul. You got to come back, bro.
This has been a lot of fun. So yeah, no, I'm excited to get to talk to you guys, and you know, I think this has been a lot of fun. So yeah, I'm happy to do this again.
Absolutely. Well, huge thanks to you, Paul, for coming on, and yeah, we'll definitely have you back. My mind is blown. There's so many questions still, unfortunately, but yeah, we'll definitely revisit this next time. Thanks a lot, Paul, for coming on, and we'll be back. I'm Josh.
I'm Juan.
And I'm Paul.
And this is Paul.
And Dave,
David eating chicken.
Dave wandered off to the bathroom.
Chicken grease off his fingers.
Yes, exactly. Take care, everyone, and we'll be back.